Hello and welcome to the Unit 4 Recorded Study Guide. This unit is a combination of chapters, in case you haven't realized that already. We're working with chapters 5 and chapter 6. We're going to look at what are some of the things that happen to the colonists that the British are doing to them that lead them into wanting to rebel, and how that rebellion from the government leads to a revolution and leads us to signing the Declaration of Independence eventually at the end of this. The first term on your study guide is New American Society. Now, what that means is really what are the differences between how people lived in England and how they lived in America and in the American colonies. And we're looking at Chapter 5, Section 1. This is starting on page 127, and the information that you're looking for this goes through 130. So it's a bit of a big chunk of information, but you're looking at how land ownership is different. In America, a lot of people can own land. Land is plentiful. In England, only 5% of the people own land. How does that impact daily life? Talk about education in the colonies, things that we went over in the notes. And then, you're looking at just similarities and differences between the two groups. And, in America, the literacy rate, or the ability to read, is a lot higher than in England. And you look at, what causes that. Well, if you look at who is coming over here first, you're talking about religious groups seeking religious freedom. So when they have children, they want their children to read the Bible. So they teach their children how to read the Bible, so that equals a high literacy rate. That's what causes that. This influx in people being able to read allows more information to be spread, and newspapers become popular, and that's a big deal when we get closer to the revolution. So in the beginning of the American society, religion is on a huge upswing. But as time goes by, religion isn't really as big of a deal in the colonies, and that concerns a lot of people. So what you see is a push to have religion take a little bit more importance, and this term is the Great Awakening, one of two movements that we talk about in this first lecture. So the Great Awakening, it is a religious movement that sweeps through the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s. Traveling ministers, if we look at this picture, traveling ministers went around and spoke to huge groups and crowds about that you could leave the past behind and start a new relationship with God, and the past doesn't matter what you did in the past, you can be washed of that and start over. And this kind of makes people start thinking, maybe the things that we have done in the past, like the traditions that we've held, listening to the king and doing that kind of stuff, maybe that's not what we should be doing. Maybe we can start over. Maybe we can break away. Maybe we can start a new life, a new way to live. And the Great Awakening makes it easier for people to break away from British authority, and that's kind of why we talk about it. And what you also have to look at is, why would this cause so much change in the society? If you look at American society at this time, it's very, you're working with a lot of churches, a lot of different groups, and when something like this enters into the church, people saying, oh, we can break away from the past. Not everyone in that specific church is going to agree with that. So what would happen is little churches would break apart, and then there would be two churches where there was one. So what you see is that happening all over America, and that changes the way people live, because there's more churches, there's different types of religions, there's different churches being set up and different beliefs and all this kind of stuff. So, these congregations, which is a group of a church group, people that go to a specific church, these congregations argue and they begin to split up, and that's, a big reason why it changes the American society as much as it does. The second movement that we look at is the Enlightenment, and when we look at the Enlightenment, we're looking at page 132, and we're also looking at John Locke, and he is also on page 132. So John Locke is going to be a huge person of importance in this unit, and the Enlightenment is basically his movement. He is a huge part of it. The Enlightenment is basically emphasizing that human reason and science is the way to get to, knowledge and, learning and things like that. What this is a shift from is people just thinking, oh, we're going to, say the king is the king because he's the king, and that's just what it's going to be. And because his dad was the king, so he's going to be the king. Well, now instead, what you have is people thinking, let's use reason here, and maybe think that there are better people out there for the job. Let's go through a process. Let's think about this. So, human reason and science for the Enlightenment. John Locke in particular, he is saying just because the king's father was the king doesn't make him the king. There's no God-given right to rule, and every person has natural rights. John Locke also says that these natural rights should be protected by the government. This is an abbreviation for government, in case you've never seen that before, but these natural rights should be protected by the government, and what John Locke is saying about these natural rights and about them being protected by the government, that is that if the government isn't protecting the natural rights, then the people should, realize that they have to get rid of the government and put in a new one. So, if the natural rights aren't being protected by the first government, the people should realize this and change, abolish, remove, do something to the government that makes them different. And if that government doesn't work out for them, and if that government isn't protecting their rights, then they have to get another one. And so on until you get the right one. That's this whole idea about the Enlightenment, is that we follow a process. We get to the best choice. And if the first thing doesn't work, we change it and put in a new one. And if the next thing doesn't work, we change it and put in a new one. It's like an experiment, but on a huge scale because it's the government. So, as the Enlightenment takes off, not only in the colonies but also in England, people are, trying to get their rights in England as well. And the first step to gaining those rights is the Magna Carta. And this is on page 137. We're moving on to chapter 5, section 2. So, if we look at the Magna Carta here, it is a document that is guaranteeing rights to English people. So it's guaranteeing rights to English. This is basically, it's going to limit the king's power. It's taxes can't just be enforced, property can't just be seized without a reason or a vote or something like that. So Magna Carta is the first document that guarantees rights to the English. And then we move on from the Magna Carta, and then there's the English Bill of Rights. But soon, these rights that they have worked to establish, they come under attack. And they come under attack by this guy right here, who is King James II. King James II takes away people's rights. People don't like that, obviously. And then what happens is Parliament, who is, the lawmaking body of England, they want to get rid of him because he is taking people's rights. So they get rid of him, and they ask William and Mary to become king and queen. That's who these people are over here. So William and Mary become king and queen. they kick James out because he doesn't have any support and he's going to be killed, so he has to leave. And this change in power is known as the Glorious Revolution. This whole story can be found on page 140, and it's basically the Glorious Revolution. It's the change from James to William and Mary. So the Glorious Revolution is that change in power. The monarchs change. The king is like a monarch. That's what you call it, like a monarchy. Like the people at the top of that are the monarchs. So William and Mary become the new monarchs during the Glorious Revolution. Meanwhile, in the colonies, people are trying to get more rights, and their rights are restored by William and Mary, but they're still fighting for other rights, and that one of the big rights that comes into play at this time is freedom of the press, and that comes to light during the John Peter Zenger trial, and this is on page 141. So this has to do with freedom of the press. This whole story with John Peter Zenger is he writes some criticisms about New York's governor. So John Peter Zenger, he's criticizing New York's governor, and what he's saying are true things. They're true statements, but the governor doesn't care. He doesn't want to be made fun of or doesn't want to be shown in a bad light. What happens is he goes to court. He's taken there. He's going to, be thrown in jail for saying that the governor is taking bribes, which the governor is actually taking bribes. And what ends up happening is he is released because they argue that, as long as people speak the truth, they should be able to write down whatever they want. The problem becomes if you are writing something that's not true. So it's okay for Peter Zenger to write down, the governor of New York is taking bribes and he's a bad dude because he takes bribes. That's fine. The governor might not like that, but it's not his place to throw him in jail. I mean, he shouldn't do the bad things if he doesn't want those bad things written down. Now, John Peter Zenger could be thrown in jail if he starts writing down that the governor of New York likes to go out in the middle of the night, dress up like a woman, and kill puppies. I mean, that's not true. That's not what he does. That's, paints him in a bad light, and it's not true. So it's not fair to write things that aren't true about somebody. So, freedom of the press, John Peter Zenger, you can speak the truth, all this kind of stuff. Now, with salutary neglect, we kind of go back a little bit to William and Mary. So during this time, with William and Mary being the monarchs of England, the colonies are allowed to kind of do things on their own and self-govern, and that gets them used to this independence. I give the example in my class about if your parents said, hey, you can stay out as late as you want, go wherever you want, check in sometimes, but we're not going to worry about it. You can do whatever you want. Just we'll be all right with it. So you get used to that independence. You're staying up until 5:30 in the morning. You're not coming home for weeks at a time, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, next year at this time, they say, okay, now we don't want this anymore. We don't like it. We want you to be in bed at 6 p.m. every night. So you would have gotten used to that independence, and now you have all these rules in place on you, and that is going to create a lot of conflict between you and your parents. So that's kind of what happens with England and the colonies. The colonies are used to this salutary neglect, which means beneficial neglect, or being left alone for the benefit of yourself. And they get used to that independence, and now what we're going to see is that independence is taken away and a lot of rules are put into place. So that's salutary neglect. Now we're going to move on to the French and Indian War. So a few things about the French and Indian War. The first thing that you have to understand is that it is not a war between the French and the Indians. It is we call it the French and Indian War because that is who the British are fighting. So the French are in the yellow territory. The British are in the purple-ish territory. And what causes this war is that British fur traders are moving on to French territory, so then there's going to be some conflict. And yeah, so X's mean conflict. The French and Indian War, we're talking about this on page 143. If we look at pre-war boundaries, the British have some of this coastland, but the French have a lot of territory over here. And as we get into this war, the French are winning a lot. The British are not really putting up much of a fight. Benjamin Franklin, who is this guy down here, he suggests the Albany Plan of Union, which is on 144. It is basically the first plan to unite the colonies. And, it's a plan. They don't go through with it because the colonies don't want to lose their power. But, he thinks that, we're never going to win this war if we don't work together, if we don't unite. And eventually, the colonies and Britain turn it around a little bit because the people in England send over the best generals and more troops, and they put William Pitt in charge of the war, and things start turning around, and they win the Battle of Quebec, and eventually the British win this war. And at the end of the war, there are some conflicts with Native Americans out in the frontier, because if you look at it, now all of this is now British, and they are going to take over these little forts all over the place. And when the French were there, they would give Native Americans gifts, and the British don't want to do that, so it caused a lot of conflict. Where there's X's, there's conflict. So causes a lot of conflict with the Native Americans and British and the settlers going over there. So what the British decide to do is they don't want to deal with all of this conflict anymore, so they put in the Proclamation of 1763, and you can look at this on page 148. It's this line that's right here, and it says that you cannot move west of the Appalachian Mountains. So can't move west of Appalachian Mountains. And, that's going to make the colonists really angry, first of all, because they just fought for all of this land out here. People died for this land out here, and now they're saying, the government is saying, you can't use that. Your husband, your brother, your son died for that land, but you can't use it. And that's going to make the colonists really angry. And a lot of their anger is going to be forced upon England, the king, and Parliament. And Parliament is, the definition can be found on page 138. We talk about it here because they are going to be passing, a lot of these laws, like the Proclamation of 1763, or the Quartering Act, or the Stamp Act. So when we look at some of the things that they do, the first thing that they get really mad about, the colonists get really mad about, is the Proclamation of 1763 right after the war. But not only do they want to stop conflict because of this war, the British are also needing to pay back a lot of money because of this war. So they want to, raise taxes, because the way that the government's going to make money is they're going to raise taxes. So the first step here is the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act can be found on page 158, and basically the English want to enforce the Proclamation of 1763, and in order to do that, they send 10,000 troops over to guard kind of the border, or make sure no one's getting through. And what they don't think about is, where are all of these troops going to live? I wonder. It's really expensive to build new places, so we'll just have them live with the colonists, and they'll have to take British soldiers in. So that's what the Quartering Act is all about. It's trying to provide housing for British troops, and they're going to do that by just forcing the colonists to take in the British troops. So now on to them trying to make money with the Stamp Act, which is also something that Parliament passes. It's on page 158. Basically, the Stamp Act, you're looking at, you had to get a stamp on something, on a legal document, in order for it in order to show that you paid the tax, and if you didn't get it, it'd be illegal to have it. So if you're printing newspapers, you had to get a stamp on it, and if you didn't, you couldn't sell your newspapers. So now you're paying more money to print your newspaper, so that means your customer has to pay more money, so that means the colonists are going to be angry. A part of the population in America starts forming formal protests and trying to go about this reasonably. They form the Stamp Act Congress, and you can look at that also on page 158. Other groups were formed, secret groups like the Sons of Liberty, and that is on page 158 as well. They're going to be doing, kind of the boycotts, and they're going to be attacking people, attacking customs officials to make them not want to collect the taxes. This is Sam Adams. He's one of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty. And, they're boycotting things, and boycotts are really effective because British companies lose money, and that puts pressure on the British government and all this kind of stuff. So what ends up happening is they get rid of the Stamp Act. Parliament says, okay, no more Stamp Act. Yay, you did it. But we're going to put in the Declaratory Act, which is on page 159, that says whatever we say from here on out goes. You have to listen to us. No more being, little brats about stuff. You have to listen to us about everything from here on out. We have the final say. So they're starting to put their foot down, and we're going to see how that escalates over time. So from here, we're going to move on to the next stuff with the Townshend Acts and the Boston Massacre. So Parliament gets rid of the Stamp Act in response to the boycotts and the Sons of Liberty doing all this kind of stuff and whatever. But the problem is they put in the Declaratory Act and says, oh, we're going to put our foot down and all this stuff, but it doesn't create any new taxes, and they still need a lot of money. So they put in the Townshend Acts, which is something that you can find on page 162. These are put into place they're thought of by Charles Townshend, obviously, because they are named after him. But, this is going to tax imports like glass and tea and paper and all this kind of stuff. And this makes the colonists really angry. Now, if we just step back a little bit and we look at all of these acts, like the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and wonder, why don't the colonists like these? Why are they so upset? And really what's happening is it's not that it's because it's more money that they have to pay. It's because they do not have any representation in this vote in Parliament to say, we're going to pass the Townshend Acts, we're going to increase taxes. They just wake up one morning, and now everything that they want to buy is more expensive. They didn't have a say. They didn't have a vote. And that's really what they're upset about. They're upset about the lack of representation. They're upset about they don't have a say in the government. And that's the big issue that the conflict starts out from. So, they're getting a little restless, the colonists are. They're, forming these protests, boycotts, all this kind of stuff. So the King George, King George III is now the king. So he sends over more troops, and he sends a lot of troops to Boston because that's where a lot of the protesting and boycotting is centraling around. So he sends a lot of them to Boston, and this results in the Boston Massacre, 163 through 164. It's the whole story where a lot of people did their A-level over this. You have troops lined up, and people start surrounding them. They're throwing snowballs at them and yelling mean things at them. And then, all of a sudden somebody yells fire, somebody in the crowd or a troop, who knows. But long story short, 5 people die because the British soldiers shoot them. And those British soldiers are taken into court, and John Adams defends them. So John Adams defends the British troops. And it's not like John Adams is, a guy that loves the British or anything. He just thinks that everyone should have a fair trial. So this is a big step because it shows that the colonists aren't just, going around and they're just going to arrest all the British people and kill them all and all this kind of stuff. And they're saying, we're reasonable people. we're going to give you a trial if you deserve one, and everyone deserves to have a fair shot at being innocent or being proven guilty. So from there on, there's more troops coming in to the colonies, and the colonists need to have a little bit more communication and more organization. So they form committees of correspondence, which is on page 165. Committees of correspondence, they're groups of people that pass on information to each other, better organization, better protests, better boycotts. This is what the British are doing here. This is what the British are doing here. This is what we should do to fight back. One of the things that they organize is the Boston Tea Party. This whole story can be found on page 166. The Boston Tea Party were looking at people boarding these English ships and dumping a whole bunch of tea into the Boston Harbor, basically destroying a whole bunch of British property, making British companies lose a whole bunch of money. It's basically like they're taking, if it's like you walk into Best Buy and just break all the TVs in Best Buy. And, how are the people that work at Best Buy or own Best Buy, how are they going to feel about that? They're obviously going to be pretty ticked off. So, you're going to get in trouble. And that's what, happens with these people. It's not like, oh, we threw a bunch of tea in there and now they're going to get mad, but it's all right. Well, what happens is the British decide, no, we are going to put our foot down. You cannot throw your little temper tantrum about the Tea Act and, decide that you're going to throw a whole bunch of tea in the harbor and just get away with it. So what the British do is they put in the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts can be found on page 169 through 170. And basically they closed the port of Boston until the colonists paid for the tea. And this is an interesting rule because the colonists had already offered to pay back the tea. But the problem is they say we'll pay back the tea as long as you get rid of the Tea Act. And the British say no. You're going to pay the tea back, and we're not going to get rid of the Tea Act. You're going to pay the taxes too. You have to listen to us. We are the ones in charge. You cannot, just throw a temper tantrum and get away with everything. So they do a little bit more things. A new quartering act, the royal governor is put into place, and all this other kind of stuff. So what the point here is that they call these the Intolerable Acts because it's like they can't live with them. They just can't. The colonists just can't stand these acts. They can't deal with them, and they need to get rid of them. And so the Continental Congress is set up, the first Continental Congress. It is an important step because this is kind of what the future government of the United States is going to be set up around, this idea of the Continental Congress. But the Continental Congress comes together to try to figure out things to do to get around the Intolerable Acts, and they say that all the colonies need to ban trade with Britain, and you need to start training militias in all of the colonies. So ban trade, train militias all over the colonies to prepare kind of to fight back and to, they see kind of a fight that is coming on. And that's ultimately what happens when we look at the next thing on your study guide, which is the battles of Lexington and Concord. So the First Continental Congress tells people to start training militias, get ready, and as people are storing guns and ammunition, the British are noticing this and they don't like that. So the British troops start marching on Concord because they are storing, or the colonists are storing weapons and ammunition in that city, and they're going to march, the British are, to Lexington and Concord to destroy those weapons and arrest some people. So that's kind of the reason why these battles start. So we're looking at page 173 through 174. The British are marching there to destroy stored weapons. That's their whole purpose, really. And the thing about this is the colonists have planned for this. They are ready to move when the British move. And that's where, Paul Revere comes into place. And that's why he is on your study guide as well. His job and his part of this plan is to spread the news of British movement. So Paul, this is still on page 140 or 173 through 174. So they have to decide which way the British are going to leave Boston. So they could either go this way and go around, or they could go this way and go to the same place. So they start moving, the British do, and Paul Revere and William Dawes and all these people go around and they're saying, the British are coming and all this kind of stuff. And they warn people, they start forming, all the militia start showing up. There's a small battle and the British move on. They are winning, but they get to a bridge. The British are kind of losing a lot of lives. They have to retreat and turn around. 4,000 Minutemen show up in the area and start shooting people as they're running away. And the British are forced to retreat back to Boston. With these two battles, this marks the start of the Revolutionary War. So that's what these battles really are. Start of the Revolutionary War. They started because the British want to destroy the stored weapons, and once they are fought, and once the British have to retreat all the way to Boston, they become the start of the Revolutionary War. So now that this battle has taken place, the colonies realize that they really have to start working together because now they are in kind of a full-on battle with the British. And that's why they set up the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress does a few things. We're going to see something that they do here in just a little bit that's really important, but this is on page 178. They do one thing that really is going to set up, helping us during the war. So they create the Continental Army, which is actually down here as well. John Hancock is on here because he is the president of the Second Continental Congress. Second CC, if you will. So, wow, that's a lot of jargon in that one. Pres of the Second CC, which is Continental Congress. This is John Hancock. I'm sure you've all seen Lincoln's signature, really big on the Declaration of Independence, which we will talk about in just a second. But the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, is going to be America's government throughout this war, and they actually create the Continental Army. The Continental Army, they talk about this on page 178 as well. And the other thing that the Second Continental Congress does is they put George Washington in control of the Continental Congress. So, George Washington is the leader of Continental Army, and that's important because, we're going to see him take on a larger role after the Revolutionary War. Maybe, if we win this time, who knows. But the Continental Army is, undertrained. It's undermanned. It's outmanned, I guess you could say, because the British are a powerful nation. They're a powerful army, and, they have to start training people, and that's George Washington knows that. And it's not just going to be an easy fight. So the Continental Army is the first step in, getting those militias away from the disjointed, unorganized groups into one central trained force. But, we're still a long ways from that. And, we're still a long ways from everybody wanting to say, hey, we're going to go and fight the British. A lot of people hope to avoid a total break from the British, but Thomas Paine wrote a document called Common Sense, which is this document right here, and this is Thomas Paine. This is going to be found on page 180. Basically, the purpose of this pamphlet is to convince Americans that a complete break with Britain was necessary. And he's basically saying, oh, it's common sense that we should do this. It makes perfect sense. It's a no-brainer. And people start reading this pamphlet and they start realizing, maybe it is time for us to follow our own destiny. Maybe it is time for us to break away. So Thomas Paine, common sense. So the last thing and probably most important thing that the Second Continental Congress does is they write the Declaration of Independence. Is important here to remember about the Declaration of Independence is they choose Thomas Jefferson, who is on page 181, to write it. So he is the author of the Declaration of Independence. They choose him because he is from Virginia, and they need Virginia in order for the independence movement to succeed. And they hope that because they show, Thomas Jefferson, he wrote this, and he's from Virginia, you're from Virginia, you should agree with Thomas Jefferson. So, the Declaration of Independence is that document that is formally declaring our independence from the British. Thomas Jefferson uses a lot of John Locke's ideas, who we have talked about, breaking away from the government, replacing the government. So the Declaration of Independence is, if the government isn't protecting the rights of the people should change or abolish or remove or whatever you want to say the government. And, this is on page 184. The actual declaration is, so you could read through that if you want. So, that's kind of where we're at right now. We have declared our independence. We have said, we're going to break away. And right now, the only thing left for the Americans to do is win the war, which we'll see if that happens or not. And if it doesn't, people like Thomas Jefferson and the people in the Continental Congress, they're going to be in trouble because they're going to be basically committing treason against the British, and they would be hanged. So let's finish up by looking at the B-level questions real quick. As always with these B-level questions, we have touched on a lot of them briefly as we've talked about the other terms. Great Awakening, how did it change American society? Well, the people started thinking we could break away from the past. We don't have to listen to the normal traditions that we have over time. And not only that, but just the simple fact that these congregations, these groups of people are breaking apart and arguing with each other leads to change just because, it's something new. How did the Enlightenment influence the colonists? You talk about the ideas of John Locke, what those ideas lead to, human reason, deciding that if the government isn't working for me, we should change it. English rights strengthened over the centuries, Magna Carta, English Bill of Rights, William and Mary, Glorious Revolution. On that same kind of idea, how were colonial rights affected by political change? Talk about that shift from strict King James to lenient William and Mary, and how they get used to salutary neglect and what problems that might lead to. Why were Native Americans involved in conflicts between the Europeans? Well, that goes back to the French and Indian War, and how the French and the Native Americans would have alliances, and the English and the Native Americans would have alliances. So when the English fought the French, the Native Americans are kind of drug into it because of the fur trading alliances and all this kind of stuff. How did the French and Indian War change the colonial world? I think if you just look at that map and see pre-war boundaries and post-war boundaries, you will automatically see that the colonial world is completely changed. The French are completely kicked out. The British now have a lot more land. They have everything. And I think even you could take it a step further and say, the end of the war and then the institution of the Proclamation of 1763 leads the colonists to get angry with the English, and that changes the colonial world as well. Not only the boundaries and the land that's changed hands, but the things that happen after the war. Setting up the Proclamation of 1763, needing to pay back all of the money. That leads to a lot of change. Why were colonists threatened by Parliament's new laws? We talked about that. it's just they don't have any say. They don't have any representation. So, I mean, how can you not be threatened by these laws if you don't have any say about them? They're just showing up. What rights were threatened by the Intolerable Acts? I mean, you just need to look up the Intolerable Acts and you talk about them. And why would they make them so angry? Removing town meetings. Why would that make the colonists angry? What events led to the Battle of Bunker Hill? I would just start all the way. You could start talking about Lexington and Concord, and that whole process of leading up to the British retreating, and then the British deciding that they're going to try to push back out of Boston to attack Bunker Hill and all this kind of stuff. What does the Declaration of Independence say about the government and the rights of the people? This should be why. Why did the colonists feel this was necessary? Why did they feel it was necessary for the government to protect people's rights? Who said that originally? What does that person say about it? What does the Declaration say about it? So, just look at all those things. Shouldn't be too bad. Just study over them. And, so that's it. We will have an online study session tonight at 7:30. That is the 19th of November, 2012. 7:30, get on, study with us, have a chance to win some stuff, lunch passes, candy, vending machine stuff, all that good stuff. And if you participate even just a little bit, answer a little question, answer a poll question, ask a question, do something, you'll earn some points that really can help your test grade boost up by 3-4% even, and that is pretty good. Not to mention the fact that you will be studying, and that will help you anyway. So just keep studying, keep looking over your study guide. We will all be good for the test tomorrow, and good luck.